Welcome to part 2. Follow and subscribe for more. Uju took Neoma's hand and led her to the chief priest's house the next morning. The sun was already high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the village. They walked in silence, Neoma's heart racing with anxiety. She had never been to the chief priest's house before, and she didn't know what to expect. When they arrived, Uju knocked on the door, and a soft voice bade them enter. Inside, the chief priest sat on a stool, surrounded by various artifacts and strange objects. He looked up at them with kind eyes and motioned for them to sit. Uju explained the situation, leaving out no details. The chief priest listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When Uju finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "Neoma, my child, you are indeed in a difficult situation. But fear not, for I shall help you. However, you must be honest with me, are you certain the king is the father of your child?" Neoma nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, chief priest. I am certain. He is the only one I have been with." The chief priest nodded again. "Very well. I shall perform a ritual to protect you and your child. But you must also do something for me, you must leave the palace immediately and go into hiding. The king's wives will not take kindly to this news, and I fear for your safety." Neoma's eyes widened in fear. "But where shall I go? I have no one to turn to." The chief priest smiled. "Do not worry, my child. I have already made arrangements for you. You shall stay here. Uju, here, shall accompany you and ensure your safety." Uju nodded, determination in her eyes. "I shall not leave her side, chief priest. We shall face this together." The chief priest arrived at the palace at dawn, seeking an audience with the king. He was ushered into the throne room, where Arinza sat, looking tired but regal. "Chief priest, what brings you to my court so early?" Arinza asked, his voice firm but curious. The chief priest bowed. "Your Majesty, I come to discuss a matter of great importance. It concerns one of your servants, Neoma." Arinza's expression changed from curiosity to surprise. "Neoma? What about her?" The chief priest took a deep breath. "She is with child, Your Majesty. And the child is yours." Arinza's face turned red with anger, and he slammed his fist on the armrest. "How dare you? You also join her on this matter." The chief priest stood firm. "I speak the truth, Your Majesty. Neoma has confirmed it, and I have performed a ritual to ensure her safety and the child's. But I must warn you, Your Majesty, your wives will not take this news lightly. I implore you to consider Neoma's safety and the child's well-being." Arinza's anger slowly gave way to concern, and he leaned forward. "What do you propose I do, chief priest?" The chief priest bowed. "I suggest you grant Neoma your protection, Your Majesty. Allow her to stay in a safe palace until the child is born. And considering the child as your own." Arinza nodded thoughtfully, his mind racing with the implications. "Very well, chief priest. I shall grant Neoma my protection." The king nodded, "But when she gives birth, she will return with the child to her homeland. I will not have her child living in the palace, and I will not risk my wife's wrath. See to it that Neoma understands this, chief priest." The chief priest bowed. "As you wish, Your Majesty. But please, consider the child's well-being. Neoma's village is far away, and the journey will be treacherous. Perhaps it would be better for the child to remain here, under your protection." Arinza shook his head. "No, chief priest. I have made up my mind. The child will not be raised in the palace. Neoma will return to her village, and I will provide for her and the child from afar. But they will not live here." The chief priest nodded reluctantly, knowing that the king's mind was made up. As you wish, Your Majesty. I will inform Neoma of your decision. As the chief priest left the palace, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He knew that Neoma would be heartbroken when she heard the king's decision. And he wondered what the future held for the young woman and her child. Neoma wept bitterly, her body shaking with sobs. Why did I sacrifice my virginity for him, only to be cast aside like a used cloth, she lamented. I thought he loved me, but it was all a lie. He only wanted to satisfy his desires, and now I'm left with a child to raise on my own. Uju, who was sitting with her, tried to comfort her. Neoma, don't cry. The chief priest will help us. We'll figure something out. But Neoma was beyond consolation. She felt used and discarded, like a tool that had served its purpose. She thought of her village, her family, and the shame she would bring upon them. She thought of the child growing inside her, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The chief priest tried to reassure her, Neoma, the king has promised to provide for you and the child. You will not be abandoned. But Neoma's tears only flowed harder. I don't want his money or his provisions, she sobbed. I want his love, his acceptance. I want him to acknowledge our child as his own. Uju and the chief priest exchanged worried glances. They knew that Neoma's situation was precarious, and that the king's rejection would have far-reaching consequences. They vowed to stand by her, to support her through the trials that lay ahead. But for now, they could only watch as Neoma wept, her heart shattered into a million pieces. The king's wives gathered around him, their faces filled with curiosity and concern. What is this about, my lord? Asked Edwoa, the first wife. Arinza took a deep breath before speaking. It's about Neoma, the young servant who has been attending to me. She is with child, and I am the father. The room fell silent, with each wife processing this information in their own way. Then, suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. How could you, my lord? Shouted Oma, the second wife. You know the laws of the land. You can't just father a child with a servant. I know, Arinza said, holding up his hands for calm. But it's done now. And I've decided that Neoma will stay in the palace until she gives birth. The wives gasped in shock. What? That's unacceptable, cried Akua, the third wife. She's a servant, not a wife. She can't just live among us. Arinza's face hardened. I've made up my mind. Neoma will stay, and she'll receive the same care and attention as any of you. I won't have her and our child suffering because of my mistake. The wives seethed with anger and resentment, but they knew better than to cross the king. They nodded reluctantly, their faces set in disapproving lines. As they left the throne room, they couldn't help but whisper among themselves. This is a disaster, said Edwoa. Mark my words, this will bring shame and chaos to our household. But Arinza didn't hear them. He was too busy thinking about Neoma and the child she carried. He knew he had made a mistake, but he was determined to make it right. End of part 2. Subscribe for part 3.